You write, I believe investors spend far too much time reading information which will expire worthless today, tomorrow, next week, or next month. And I really paused and I thought it was a remarkable observation, because even serious investment professionals, and I've been in rooms and conversations where so much time is spent on something that clearly will expire within a day or two. What are your thoughts?
Investors don't think, right, I've only got X amount of hours to make a return for my clients. And therefore, what I've got to do is I've got to spend that time wisely, because if I waste that time, that's time that I won't get to spend researching. And I used to think about, well, what am I doing? And is that going to get the best bang for my time? Because my scarcest resource was time.
Mm-hmm.
My time was precious. Most people probably work 60 hours a week, are involved in running money. Most people are pretty dedicated that I've seen. But it's still, you've got a huge volume of information flying at you. Obviously, knowledge is never wasted, because when you're an investor, you might go and see a company and think that is a garbage company, a garbage industry. That's hugely valuable, because it means that you never have to waste time seeing anybody in that industry again. There are no easy wins. But I think a lot of people get drawn to the complexity. And I think a lot of people just feel that they've got to know the answer to everything.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, investor, and a founding partner of Seekard Associates, a boutique investment firm founded in New York City. Join me on this quest to unearth the wisdom of the ages. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're tuning into my podcast. For your convenience, the show is available on a multitude of platforms, including Spotify, Apple, Google, Audible, and many more. If you want to keep up with all new episodes, and there's so many more in the queue, make sure you subscribe and please do share it with friends and family. Review it and rate it if you can. Every little gesture matters, and I thank you for it. If you'd like to know more about me, or if you're interested in getting in touch, simply Google my name and it will lead you straight to my website. There's a contact form there, or check notes to this episode for links. I love hearing how you listen to my podcast on your walks, hikes, alone times, drives, trips, and more. I trust that my guests and I are a wonderful company on those adventures. I also enjoy reading how some of you are rehearsing and answering some questions that I ask my guests. I love hearing that. If you're new to the show, please scroll down and check out all the amazing guests I've had over the last few months. If you are serious about investing, money wisdom, wealth, and living a better life, you'll find plenty of episodes with some incredible ideas. For those who enjoy reading thoughtful pieces, I regularly write articles on Substack, which I'm sure you'd find insightful. Find me there and follow me as well. Finally, I'd like to mention my latest book, Crisis Investing. It's a collection of 100 essays that I penned for our clients during the tumultuous times of the global COVID pandemic. These essays are both timely and timeless, providing a unique perspective on navigating through crises. They were never meant to be published, but here they are available to you. Please find the book on Amazon. The book has already received considerable recognition and much love, ranking among the top releases on Amazon in its initial weeks. Thank you for your support and for being a part of my listener community. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. If you're curious to learn more about analyzing businesses and picking stocks, this episode is a fascinating look behind the curtain with a seasoned hedge fund analyst who now teaches a variety of courses on the matter. Steve is the founder of Behind the Balance Sheet, the premier investment training consultancy. The company runs forensic accounting courses for leading institutions, Since the first course in June 2018, over 500 investment professionals have taken the program. More recently, courses have been made available to private investors online. Steve also produces bespoke research for a small group of institutional clients. Steve is regularly in the press, in the UK's Investors Chronicle, in the Times and the Financial Times, on Times Radio, and on leading investment podcasts, including Bloomberg Odd Lots and Grant Williams' podcast, talking about accounting issues. Steve spent some 20 years as an equity analyst at different investment banks, covering various sectors, and was consistently rated in the top 10 in his sector in Extel and Reuters surveys. He moved to the buy side in 2005 and was a partner and head of research at a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. He specialized in using a deep dive research approach to identify special situation opportunities. Steve trained as an accountant and lives in London. He enjoys reading, yoga, skiing, and is interested in investment theory, wine, and classic cars. His book, The Smart Money Method, was a #1 investing bestseller on Amazon in the UK, US, and Australia. He also publishes a free weekly newsletter. You can find the links in the notes. We kick off discussing Steve's childhood and upbringing. We dive into Steve's book, The Smart Money Method, How to Pick Stocks Like a Hedge Fund Pro. Steve elaborates on his belief that investors often waste time on fleeting information. Steve delves into the significance of understanding the industry a stock operates in and what he specifically hunts for. We discussed often overlooked elements in company financials that Steve believes deserve more attention. Moving beyond numbers, Steve shared his approach to evaluating company management, stressing its crucial role in investment success. To wrap up, Steve offers his personal definition of success, shedding light on his guiding principles and beliefs. I highly recommend staying tuned until the end. Please help me welcome Steve Clapham. Well, hello, Steve. Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. As you know, I'm a big fan of your podcast that we'll talk about in a second. I really enjoyed your book. But before we get started talking about those two and your career, I'm curious about Steve, and I like to ask my guests about their childhood and upbringing and how they think this time influenced their relationship with money and led them to an investment career. So if you indulge me, share as much as you want. I'm very curious to get to know Steve from the early days.
My father wouldn't have known a stock or share if it hit him in the face. I mean, he had no idea about investing. My father left school, started work age 12. So, he was not an educated man, and he would have been incredibly mistrustful. I mean, sadly, he died when I was quite young, and he didn't see me start a career in investing. But had he seen it, he would have been baffled and would have, I think, probably been quite suspicious that I was doing something crooked or something. I don't think he would have been. Overly impressed, to be honest. So my upbringing and my career are two completely separate, incidental things. I got into investing totally by accident.
Let's talk about that accident. How did it happen?
Well, I was very fast track consultant. So I trained as an accountant. In Scotland, you can pass your exams in 18 months, and I passed my exams in 18 months, and I hated auditing. It was dull, dreadful, boring. So I applied for an overseas secondment, which the firm I was working for, you could do. And I got posted to the Netherlands. And so I went out and did a few months auditing in the Netherlands. And then one of my clients there said, "Oh, we need some help. Can you come back and help us?" And so I said, "Sure." So I went back and helped them. It was a manufacturing business. And I helped them implement a new system. And I basically stayed in Holland. And once I'd implemented that system, the London office was doing a project for Philips in Eindhoven. And they said, "Oh, can you come and help us do that?" So I stayed with them. And then the London office persuaded me to come back to London. And I carried on doing these implementation projects. It's quite technical. I won't bore you with. I became ever more expert in this narrow field that I thought if I don't get out of this, I'm going to be in trouble. So I applied for a job, and I got a job at number 5 FTSE 100 company in the UK. And I was interviewed by the finance director, and I was 2 off the finance director. So I was a pretty fast track candidate. And we'd agreed everything. And then the guy, my direct report, who reported to the finance director or CFO, called me up and he said, we made a bit of a mistake. The human resources department's pointed out that you're too young for the grade. So, you'll be doing exactly the same job, but you'll get, £1,000 less, whatever it was. I've forgotten what the numbers were. And, I said, so sorry, I don't quite understand this. I can either do the job or I can't. He said, you can do the job. It's just a technical thing. And I said, you know what? I don't want to work for a company where your performance and your career track is dictated by your age. Mm-hmm. So, thanks, but no thanks. And I was recounting the story to a friend of mine. He said, why don't you go into the city? And I said, don't be stupid. Cities for toffs and, people that have been to the right school. And he said, yeah, I know what you mean. But he said, I bet, there's this thing, an analyst. I don't really know what it is, but my secretary, her boyfriend works in one of these firms. And I bet he could tell you, where to look. So he called his secretary, and his secretary said to her boyfriend, when are you free? And he said, next Tuesday at 9:00. I went in, met him, and he offered me a job. He said, oh man, you're just exactly the sort of person that we want. And I just thought, well, I don't really know what this is, but I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. I don't want to go and work for some big industrial corporation where it's got these, stupid rules about how old you need to be before you can, pass a certain grade. And I mean, to be fair, I was, way younger than the average person, but, I just went in knowing nothing, but it sounded quite interesting, quite exciting. And I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. It was really interesting, really exciting. And I got fantastic training and, I didn't look back. I mean, I spent most of my first 10, 15 years on the sell side. And I then moved to the buy side because one of my clients said, oh, you're coming to work for me. I said, oh. And, I went to work for what was then the biggest financials hedge fund in the world, doing the non-financial investments. So they always did a bit of stuff outside the banks and insurance and property. And so I was responsible for that.
It sounds like it was meant to be. They would always find you and you would always find a way.
I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, in my podcast, I always ask people, did you always want to be an investor? And so half of people say, oh, when I was 7, my grandmother taught me about investing. Or they say, oh, no, it was a complete accident. And, John Armitage, who manages Edgerton Capital, CIO and co-founder of Edgerton, manages, I think, something like $28 billion. And he's got a 27-year track record, which is as good as any investor I've ever seen. And must be one of the top hedge fund managers in the world, I would imagine. I mean, he got into it completely serendipitously, completely by accident. I mean, I think, for a lot of people, your career is quite serendipitous and it's not necessarily part of a plan. That can be, investors or other careers. I think eventually you just find something that you enjoy and therefore you'll be good at it. So, if you speak to successful people, they could probably have been successful in other endeavors, but there's very few endeavors which are as challenging as the investment world, as you know.
But I think it's very encouraging that you don't have to know that you have to be an investor at the age of 5 or 6. You can discover it later. In my case, I was fascinated with economics, business, history, so I was getting my degrees in that direction. But I was not really interested in the stock market. It was about the time when the internet bubble burst. A lot of my professors lost money, or at least that was my impression. And they told me that the stock market is a casino. So we would have... It could be. You can make it one. But I picked up a book, One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch, and he said that stocks are small pieces of businesses. And somehow this one idea opened my eyes, and I started reading every investment book I could find, and I couldn't look back. And I thought that this is the best place for me to deploy everything I've been curious about. And if I'm right now and then, these ideas could make money. So it's not only an intellectual pursuit.
I have one comment about the age. I was born in Poland. I went to schools around Europe. And in Europe, a lot of my professors told me what you heard is that you have to be of a certain age to speak up in the room. And they told me, if you get an internship out of school, just remember you're young. I think they could tell that I have questions. I'm curious. I'm inquisitive. And they said at some point, you'll be able to ask those questions, but wait. And I thought if I don't ask them now at 20, I will not know it at 40. And I thought there's some sort of lack of logic in that.
Yeah.
And when I came to New York and I was giving my first pitch for stock at the age of 24, I was half the age of the second oldest person in the room. And I have to tell you that the whole room gave me full attention and full respect for the fact that I did the work, did the research, and they didn't care that this was my first stock that I ever worked on. And I thought this might be an environment where I can flourish. And I think that's the environment that you found working at the firm that you found.
Well, I was in the South Side to start with, and they don't care how old or young you are. They care how good your ideas are. And funnily enough, I've worked with a guy who's a number one engineering analyst, and he must have been twice my age.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't work for, but we were grouped in industrial sectors. So I was in the industrials as opposed to consumer, the oil and other, or the financial sector. And so we had, an engineering guy, an autos guy, a construction guy, a house building guy, and electrical and tech and electronics, tech hardware. And those guys were all pretty much 20 plus years beyond my age, 20 plus years of experience. So, I think it's quite good, working with people who are a lot older because they've seen it all before and they can tell you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they quite enjoy having younger people in because they realize that you got a different approach, fresh ideas, and, maybe a different way of doing things.
And the quality of questions that I received, I think, helped me continue to grow. And I like the idea that we had people of all ages, all the way to their 80s. So people that were, 60 years older than me. And I took advantage of it by just asking them questions. And I was very curious about all the things that went wrong in the past. And I spent a lot of time with all kinds of mentors that taught me not places where I shouldn't go. And that helped me throughout the career. But I'm curious to hear about your book. So it's called The Smart Money Method, How to Pick Stocks Like a Hedge Fund Pro. How did
I normally have it here. Somebody was in the office and they said, could I have a copy of your book? And
it's gone. But tell me how it came about and who is the perfect audience for it?
I didn't set out with any particular sort of goal. I'd always wanted to write a book because I always, fancied seeing my book on the shelf of a store. And I just had the idea that, everybody should write one book in their life. And I don't know where that came from, but I had no sort of big plan or anything. And, but I did think, a book would be quite nice. And I'd kept a notebook. When I started the hedge fund, I was coming back from a conference and I'd learned a huge amount. So it was a 1 week long conference and, I'd taken copious notes at every meeting, but the notes I didn't take were the most valuable interactions were at night, having a drink with competitors and colleagues. And I'd learned all this stuff, because, we would have arguments about a stock and, oh no, that couldn't be right because I do this way and I do this and this. And I was on the plane and I was thinking, you know what, I should just write these things down. So I started writing down what I'd learned from other investors. I could use that. And if I don't write it down, I won't remember in, a month's time. And I filled up this notebook. It was an 80-page notebook probably. And I had 80 pages of notes. They weren't all, densely packed words filling the whole page. I mean, most of them had an idea and it was 3 or 4 lines. If you're looking at this, check that sort of thing. And so when I finished the notebook, I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? And so I thought, I'll just type it up because why have I got it in a notebook? It'd be better digitally, right?
Right.
So I just did a Word document. And when I was sitting down in my study at home to do some work in an evening, each time I did that, I would write off a page or 2 pages, depending, how many words it was, just 5 minutes, And, I then did all that and I thought, oh, what am I going to do with this? And I really wasn't too sure what I could do with it. And I came up with an idea. I've got these things called artifact cards. I don't know if I've got any in the office, maybe not. But there's a brilliant guy who came up with this idea. They're little cards about that size. And you buy a pack of them and there's, 80 cards in a pack. Came up with the idea of writing all the chapter headings, each heading page of the notebook on one of these cards. And I then sat at home on a Saturday morning and laid them all out on the kitchen table. And I then sort of said, well, how do these fit together? Not something you can easily do within a Word document, and doing it spatially with cards is your brain doesn't think digitally. Your brain thinks physically, or mine does. And so I laid these out and I thought, there's a pattern to this. And I thought, you know what? If I could write a book around this, because I've got the makings of a book, and I could write about my research process. Because when I look at this in this way, this is actually sort of mapping out how I do research. And so I wrote first chapter, and I had breakfast with a friend of mine who's a PR guy. And I said to him, do you know anybody who's written a book? How did you get a book published? And he said, I know an agent. And he introduced me to the agent. The agent came into the office. At the time I was at the hedge fund. Came into the office and I had a chat with him. I'd sent him the chapter of the book. And he said, I think you know what you're talking about. I think we can get this book published. We'll get you a book deal. And he managed to get the name and email of a lady at Wiley who I had a couple of email exchanges with, but she couldn't find half an hour to have a Zoom call with me. So I was speaking at an investment conference and I saw Harriman House, my publisher, had a stand. And I went over to them and I said, look, I've got this agent who is, I think he's quite good, but he can't get anybody interested in my book. My book's about finance and you're a finance book publisher. Do you think you'd be, would you even consider it? And, I was very sort of self-deprecating about it and quite depressed after, not even being able to get in front of someone to talk to. And they said, well, why don't you send us a chapter? We'll have a look at it. I sent them the chapter and they said, why don't we have a cup of coffee? We'll be in London in, 3 weeks time. And I went and had a cup of coffee with them. And they said, well, actually, I think if you did this and did that, it would be a good book. So yeah, why don't you sign up with us? So I said, well, send me the contract. They sent me the contract. I didn't even look at it. I just signed it, because I thought I need a book publisher, because I assumed that in order to get a book published, you needed a publisher. I didn't know anything about it. I'd never investigated. And at the end of it, I had a book and I then sent it to the publisher and they edited the first half really well. They then changed the editor. It didn't do such a good job in the second half. And I said, I think it needs a bit more editing in the second half. We did a bit more editing. And it was sort of ready in April 2020. And I thought, actually, it seems a bit stupid to publish a book in the middle of a pandemic without saying anything about the pandemic. So I stupidly added a blog that I'd written onto the end of the book. Mm-hmm. And that was stupid because I came up with these ideas about what the pandemic might mean without having any real knowledge or understanding of it. So if I had to do it again, I wouldn't include that chapter. But the rest of it, I was pretty happy with.
I thought it was a good chapter. I actually wanted to ask you about it at some point. I thought it was a good chapter. And...
Well, the rest of the book had, decades, 10, 15, 20 years of practical application. Mm-hmm. And that had like an hour's thought. And I just didn't feel that, I felt the rest of it, I could, I would die on that hill and on that bit of it, that was the best I could do at the time. And I thought it'd be foolish to publish a book without it. And also I thought, maybe people will be interested to know what somebody has to say about the long-term implications of the pandemic. So anyway, the publisher thought it was a good idea to include it. So I included it. It sold really pretty well. Mm-hmm. And most books don't make any money. My book's made me a bit of money, but it's made Harriman House a lot of money. they came back to me and they said they wanted me to write my second book. And they told me what they wanted me to write it about. And they upped the royalties by like 75%. And I said, I now know what it's all about, and you need to do a lot better. And I said, and this is that, I don't want to write that book. Here's the book I want to write. And they said, oh, we wouldn't publish that. We don't want that.
I think you're going to self-publish that one.
Yeah. Well, I we'll see. I mean, I'm writing book 2 and book 3 at the moment. Not very rigorously. I mean, I haven't written any of the second book since Christmas, and I'm just doing research for the third book.
So in the book, The Smart Money Method, there are a lot of lessons, and I'm curious which ones you would pick for somebody that's new to investing, maybe somebody on the path that wants to become an analyst. But also, I'm thinking always of clients that want to be more knowledgeable about the investment process and have somebody run the money for them.
I occasionally get people will email me and say, oh, I loved your book. And quite often, if I'm speaking at a private investor conference, I was speaking at a conference a few weeks ago, and I'd gone in to set up, and there was a guy sitting in the front row with his wife, very excited. And so I just went over to chat with him, and he said, oh, I'm in the middle of your book. I'm really enjoying it. And it gives me a great deal of satisfaction that the book has helped thousands of people. Mm-hmm. And I had, a professional fund manager leave a review with his name saying, this was the book I wish I had when I was setting up starting in the industry. And that to me is a brilliant compliment. Although I have to say, if the person who left the 1-star review and the 1-word review useless is listening, can you please be a bit more constructive?
So I write articles, and I wrote 3 books, and I can share with you my experience. And I agree that it's hard that you get some feedback, and some of the feedback is, I think somebody had a bad day and has not read the book. So in the last book, in the first few pages, I say what is in the book and what is not in the book. And I hope that somebody that spends a few dollars actually reads that page. And then if those things are relevant to them, then go ahead and buy the book. I thought that maybe that's a solution. But I think I'm much more excited about the people that come up to me and read the book and they say that it made a difference in their life, either because they're investment professionals or they're people that have money managed by somebody else. They feel empowered to ask better questions when they're in the room with an investment professional. So I think it plays a whole range of roles in different people's lives. And I choose to surrender and kind of let the book take a life of its own and see where it goes and who is going to benefit from it the most. But I think your book is as relevant for somebody that wants to be in an investment profession and wants to learn as somebody that's just curious about it. I'll share with you some highlights that I'm curious to talk about more. You write, I believe investors spend far too much time reading information which will expire worthless today, tomorrow, next week, or next month. And I really paused and I thought it was a remarkable observation, because even serious investment professionals, and I've been in rooms and conversations where so much time is spent on something that clearly will expire within a day or two. What are your thoughts?
Investors don't think, right, I've only got X amount of hours to make a return for my clients. And therefore, what I've got to do is I've got to spend that time wisely, because if I waste that time, that's time that I won't get to spend researching. And I used to think about, well, what am I doing? And is that going to get the best bang for my time? Because my scarcest resource was time. Mm-hmm. I mean, I work for a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. If I wanted to go to Australia to look at a plant or something, I would get on a first-class flight and go to Australia. And the money was irrelevant because the fund, was incredibly profitable. My time was precious. I think this goes back to being a management consultant, because when you're a management consultant, you've got, a very long list of tasks. And you've got to get a whole group of people to execute, because you're implementing a big computer system. And when you press the button, everything has to be ready. And if one thing's not ready, it can delay the whole implementation. And obviously you're paid to implement it on that particular Saturday. So you spend one day a week just planning. because if you don't spend that time planning, won't happen. And when I started in this city, in the stock market, nobody planned anything because, no point in planning because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. And that's a very stupid attitude because you've only got 40, 60, 80 hours in a week, depending how hard you want to work. And as I say, most people probably work 60 hours a week, are involved in running money. Most people are pretty dedicated that I've seen, but it's still, you've got a huge volume of information flying at you. So I used to think about, okay, so if I do this, what am I going to get out of it? And how far will it take me down the road of making a return on the capital? And if I couldn't see a fairly direct route, that, obviously knowledge is never wasted because when you're an investor, you might go and see a company and think that is a garbage company, a garbage industry. That's hugely valuable because it means that you never have to waste time seeing anybody in that industry again. I mean, even a waste of time isn't a waste of time. So you've got to think about it quite carefully. But I found very few people consider the idea of, should I look at this really complex business where it looks like a really fun toy to play with and I can spend a lot of time solving that puzzle? Or should I look at this really simple thing, which won't take me very long and actually could be equally profitable? Nobody says, everybody says, that looks like a really interesting thing. I'm going to spend my time on that. Nobody says, actually, for a third of the time, I could make as much money. And that's the way you should think. You shouldn't go chasing the complicated things. You should chase the simple things, chase the easy things, easy wins. And I mean, I say easy wins. I mean, there are no easy wins, but I think a lot of people get drawn to the complexity, and I think a lot of people just feel that they've got to know the answer to everything. So I spent some time working for a wealth manager, so 2 or 3 days a week. I picked international equities for them. I ran money for some of their higher risk clients, the clients that were looking to make a big return and didn't mind having an 8, 10, 12 stock portfolio. Well, it used to cause the private bankers a bit of concern. Grown up investors, grown up clients. And, I was a member of the investment committee, and every month the investment committee would sit down and ask, when are interest rates going to go up? And every month, and they would, it was like a 3 or 4 hour meeting, and they spend the first half hour talking about interest rates. And I said, you're completely wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know when it's going to happen. And if it happens this month or next month, what difference is it going to make? Because the stock market is not going to implode, and you're not going to change your allocation to treasuries or gilts as a consequence of that, because you need them there to dampen your equity exposure. So you're not going to say, interest rates are going up, so we'll sell all our gilts. You're going to carry on with the gilts. So knowing, even if you knew the answer, even if you had a crystal ball and you knew the answer, you wouldn't actually do anything different. So this is not a conversation that is worth having. And every month they had the same conversation. And every month I say, why are we having this conversation? I know it's very important that we understand when interest rates are going to go up. It's like, you should tell your client.
But listen, Steve, that's when you think about it, if you're aware that these are pointless conversations and you see that so many investment professionals lose so much time weekly or monthly or quarterly on conversations like this in big rooms with a lot of smart people, a lot of time, and you're not, it gives you a huge advantage because you can get on the plane and go see that plant somewhere.
Well, I mean, I think I was quite good at what I did. I think more importantly, I had a process that was quite good. And I think I was quite efficient. So, I didn't need to spend as much time as other people to achieve the same result. Not because I was smarter, but just because I had a different approach. And it's perfectly simple. I mean, I'm not giving away, some sort of state secret. But then, the funny thing is when you talk to consultants, they're always obsessed with process. How do you screen and I remember having a very long conversation. I mean, I think I was meant to be in for half an hour And I had a 2-hour conversation with one firm of consultants. And the guy said to me, what's your process? I said, well, I don't have one. I just arrive in the morning and I look at what's going on and I connect the dots and I look at the share prices and I see, and, I went through, example after example with him. And, I could see that he was perturbed because I wasn't, screening, I didn't have a 180 stock quality universe that I said, that's all very well. If you want to do, some long-term quality portfolio, that's a perfectly reasonable strategy. But I said, I'm doing special situations. I'm trying to make 50, 60% absolute return in, 2 years. And, buying quality stocks, that's not going to happen unless the stock market goes up. And I'm trying to make alpha. I'm trying to generate alpha. And, people, I'm not criticizing any particular investment approach or investment strategy. Obviously, your strategy has to encompass your skills and weaknesses as an individual, and also the strategy you're following. And so different approaches are perfectly normal. But I think, what I would say is there's a number of common themes. One of the common themes is sort of understand what you own and read the balance sheet.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of balance sheet, can you talk about some of the things that you look in the company's financials that you think that other investors overlook or don't pay attention to, but they really made a difference in your career?
Well, I read the 10K. I think that's a good starting point. Mm-hmm. And I don't think many people do.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So the first thing that I do is I check what the revenue is, but I don't look at the P&L. I start with the balance sheet because the balance sheet will tell you where the problems are.
Yeah.
And, in 10 minutes, I can go through the balance sheet and say, oh, okay, there's a potential issue here. And this isn't about, companies with loads of debt. This can be a company with net cash, but the balance sheet will tell you, give you a very strong first clue as to whether the company's being aggressive in its earnings management, as increasingly companies are. And it amazes me that people don't pay attention to the balance sheet. I just do not begin to understand what an investor is doing if they aren't paying attention to the balance sheet, because this is the repository of all the knowledge that you need. But what are the most important things? I think it's quite difficult. It depends on the company, depends on the industry. But if you're looking for sort of companies that are cheating, I have a couple of things that I tend to look at. I look at the margins. So, I've got this forensic accounting course and I've taught between 550 and 600 people over the last 5 years, this forensic accounting course. And, people that manage $10 billion, several of them have been on the course and gone, oh man, this is fantastic. And, I go through, I went through 50 or 60 frauds when I was building the course. So I'm trying to work out, fraud's the most extreme example of earnings management. So I thought, well, if I study a load of frauds, then I'll figure out what the common threads are. And that'll be good examples for the course, because that's the most extreme, case. And, the thing that was common about the frauds was that they all had margins that didn't make any sense. So, I say they all, but not all of them.
Right.
But, you say Wirecard, the margins could have made sense, I suppose. But, many frauds have margins which are unrealistic for the business. So one that we had in the UK not that long ago was a company called Patisserie Holdings, and they owned several brands, but the largest brand was Patisserie Valerie, which was probably 100-year-old tea shop. So it's basically Starbucks, but instead of selling coffee to take away, it's cakes to sit in and eat. But its margins were higher than Starbucks. And you just think about, here's this £100 million turnover company with a couple of £100 million market cap, which is purporting to have margins that are higher than Starbucks. Well, that doesn't seem that likely. Coffee is a very high gross margin product. Coffee beans are expensive, but you pay £3.50 or $3.50 for a cup of coffee, and the beans are 20 cents, And when you look at that and say, well, hang on a second, Starbucks is a huge company. The coffee is all to take away, whereas you're eating the cake in the restaurant. So if you look at a UK restaurant, the rent is about 10-11% of sales, and the labor costs are 35 to 40% of sales. So I don't know what percentage of Starbucks sales are to take away, but it must be at least half, right? So, you've got 50% of your sales aren't carrying 50% drag in terms of cost. I mean, it's just impossible that business could.
So it sounds like they were baking, and not only the cakes, but maybe also
the
numbers.
It was a complete fraud, and they didn't have fake cash, but they hadn't disclosed the debt on the balance sheet. So the numbers are all wrong. So I like to look at that. I like to look at working capital ratios, because if you're cheating, it generally shows up in the working capital ratios. And I like to look at cash generation, because if you're generating cash, then unless the cash is fake, and for frauds, quite a lot of the frauds, the cash is fake. So cash generation is not a guarantee that it's not a fraud.
Right.
But if you're not generating cash, there's usually a good reason for that. And companies that don't generate cash generally don't work out as investments.
Can we talk about the management? So we read the financials, we know the numbers, we analyze them the way you really well describe it in the book. And then you have a whole point about the management, and it's a tougher point. It's more qualitative. Obviously, the numbers can tell you quite a bit about how they run the business, but you're trusting your money to people that are running the business. What are some of the things you look at, and what are some of the things that you would avoid?
Well, I mean, I don't purport to have any particular skill or talent in the judgment of the management. I mean, what I like to look for are people that I think are genuine and honest. So if you lie to me, then I'll almost certainly sell my stock. I might not sell it that day. I won't be sticking around. So I've had that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times. What returns do you make in that division? Can you give me a feel for that? And the guy will tell you a number, and it's the wrong number. And then I'll say, oh, really? Why is that? And I'll go, and I'll lead him down a path. And if he's lying to me, that, I just don't have any interest in owning stock in a company where the management aren't going to be honest, because it's just too difficult to understand what's really going on, because management have got the best insight into the business. And if they're trying to lie to you, it's almost invariably a bad signal. It might not be a sinister signal. I mean, I've had this happen where the guy, I've sat down with the chief executive of one of the divisions, and he's lied to me because he basically doesn't really understand financial numbers. I'm not hugely confident about a business where, this particular one, the chief executive was a bit suspect. And I was thinking, well, if the head of a division, which has got a turnover of billions of dollars, doesn't understand return on capital, why am I here?
Yeah,
Has he got the right decisions? Probably not.
Yeah,
so, people that lie or make things up, or, that I feel uncomfortable about. I like people that are straightforward. I like people who are sort of a bit self-deprecating, and you don't get much of that. If you've made it to become the CEO of a S&P 500 company, you're usually pretty good at selling yourself. And a lot of CEOs see their job as selling themselves, selling the stock to investors. And I'm not crazy about that. I'd far rather the guy says, well, look, this is what I'm trying to do. This is the end goal. This is a strategy that I'm going to follow to get there. And these are the KPIs that you can monitor and tell me, that you can keep track of. It's whether I'm going to get to the end goal. But, honestly, I've got no real idea whether we're going to get to 18% or 15%. And we could get to 20, if things go right. people that are, sensible about it. They don't have all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
People that have all the answers make me feel less comfortable. And I look quite carefully at people's past track record. What have they done? Have they got a good record in capital allocation? Do they understand capital allocation? Do they understand what the business is about? Do they understand what they're doing? Most people understand their business, but they don't necessarily understand the financial consequences of the business. And I'm looking for somebody to understand the financial consequences.
I like the sound of that. Steve, I know you have to run in a minute, but I have one last question for you. I like to ask my guests about their definition of success, and I'm curious where you're going to take it.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Am I a successful person? If you ask my wife, she would say not enough.
I think you rephrased my question. The question was, what's your definition of success? And I'll let you be the judge if you're there yet already, or you're getting there.
Well, for me, it's not a financial metric.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not particularly concerned about money per se. I mean, obviously, I've got a reasonable amount of it, and I'm not sort of worried about putting food in the fridge or anything. So, I'm in a fortunate position. And I think, to me, success is calibrated, not in terms of book sales or newsletter subscribers or anything. Success for me is actually, I've changed career at the end of my career. And so I'm now doing something quite different. And so success for me is I'm able to get up in the morning, have breakfast with my children without high pressure getting into the office for 7:15 to see what's happened to the portfolio overnight. I walk along the canal to my office and I can relax. I don't have any particular pressure on me. And I can do stuff that I find interesting. So, I would calibrate success in terms of having fun, challenging myself, stretching myself, and learning. Because one of the nice things about doing what I'm doing is that I can go and explore new avenues. And so one of the reasons I wrote a book was because it was a new challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so success is finding the next new challenge. So I wrote a book, I started a YouTube channel, I started a podcast, I started a newsletter, and I've got to find another new challenge. I'm not quite sure what the next one will be, but
I think that the theme is that you like teaching. You learned a lot and you have a lot to share, and I think you really like teaching. And
yeah, I think helping younger people is a hugely rewarding endeavor because, just before we started, I had an intern in, and she's a really nice girl, and she's going to university in September to study accounting. And so I've given her a project to go through an unquoted company, funnily enough, go through the accounts. So she's going back 10 years for this company and one of its subsidiaries. And we're going to go through all the ratios and performance and everything else. And, I could see that she was really excited about, she knows the basics so far,
mm-hmm.
and she's going to university to study more. I see she was excited about learning about this. And that's great for me because, if I can help somebody, I think that's what your responsibility is, at the end of your career is to pass on your experience and help,
mm-hmm.
and that seems like a nice endeavor to me.
We have summer interns now and then with us, and I have a lot of fun showing them how things work. And there's this moment when it clicks, and I can tell that it all starts to make sense to them, and it's fun to see. So I enjoy that too, especially if they are really passionate about it, then I can tell that they can go places with it.
I think also, they ask sort of stupid questions,
mm-hmm.
which, they're not stupid questions, but they're ignorant questions they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to explain that is a very good test of your own knowledge and understanding, right? So if you're trying to explain a difficult concept, it can be quite a difficult thing to do unless you really understand it well. And so I find that that's really helpful. When I get questions back from my students, in the online school, we've got a community. So when you buy our main course, the Analyst Academy, you join an Analyst Academy community, and you can post questions in that community. If you don't understand part of the content, or if you've seen something externally that you don't understand, post a question. I encourage the other students to answer the questions, because I think, that's a great way of testing your own understanding. And then I always, of course, look and make sure they haven't led somebody to the wrong conclusion. That's obviously a risk. But that the idea of making sure that you're able to answer those questions, I think it's a really good idea. And I have a lot of fun with all of this. And it's not really surprising, but I didn't set out with this goal to get to here. I didn't have a particular goal. And so the fact that I'm doing stuff that I really enjoy doing is a great benefit, privilege.
It makes me happy. I really enjoyed your book, your podcast, and this conversation today, Steve. And I highly recommend all of it to anybody that's curious to learn more, no matter if they're professionals or not. I think there's a lot that they can learn from your books and your work. Steve.
Well, thank you. So your listeners can find me at behindthebalancesheet.com. I'm on Twitter very occasionally these days, because Twitter doesn't seem to work for me anymore. But when I'm there, I'm at Steve Clapham. And, the podcast you can find on all places that you find podcasts, Behind the Balance Sheet.
I think it's a good name. I think we should all look at the balance sheet now and then before we invest. Steve, I'll let you run, but it was a pleasure talking to you today. And I will include all the links in the notes so people can find all the resources that you mentioned and follow you. Thank you so much for today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Take care.
You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski. The content of this podcast is for general informational purposes only, and so are the opinions of members of Seacard Associates, a registered investment advisor, and guests of the show. This podcast does not constitute a recommendation to buy or sell any specific security or financial instruments, or provide investment advice or service. Past performance is not indicative of future results. More information on Seacard Associates is available in its Form ADV disclosure documents available at advisorinfo.sec.gov.